Hello and welcome to GameSack. Let's take a look at some games that didn't have the good fortune to get released to the masses. Now, the reasons these were canceled often vary or may not even be entirely known to the public, but it's always fun to see what various companies had cooking. First up is a canceled game from one of my favorite franchises, so let's get into it. Let's start off with Castlevania Resurrection from Konami for the Sega Dreamcast. This was being developed fairly early in the Dreamcast's life and was even demoed at E3 of November of 1999. This highly unfinished yet completely playable prototype that you're watching now is that very demo. It should be noted that this one was being developed in the US and not by any of Konami's Japanese studios. Originally it was planned for the North American launch, but obviously that did not happen. Plenty of screenshots appeared in the magazines of the time, and gaming journalists as well as fans were excited but skeptical, myself included. You play as Sonia Belmont and you're plopped right into the courtyard of the castle. You can jump and whip. Most areas can't be accessed through normal gameplay progression, but instead you need to press start and load up an area. Your whip isn't very powerful and it can take a long while to kill most enemies. Eventually you gain a power-up which makes your whip stronger, allowing you to kill enemies rather quickly. Once you get this, you can load up other areas and it makes exploring them much more fun, not that there's a ton to explore. The awkward camera doesn't help things as it can be difficult to properly aim where you want to attack. The Y button will center your camera view straight ahead if you need it. You can also toggle between a few different camera behaviors, none of them particularly great. There's even a boss fight against Medusa here. She may look pretty silly, but hey, at least it's something. This one was cancelled in March of 2000, about a year before Sega announced that they were going third party and ceasing production of the Dreamcast. It was cancelled the same day that Sony gave a firm announcement about the forthcoming PlayStation 2. According to the game's art director Greg Ordian, sorry if I mispronounced that, the announcement of the PlayStation 2 not only affected this game, but every other game Konami was working on for the Dreamcast. The graphics look sharp and the designs mostly look pretty good. Unfortunately, there's only one droning music track in here. I think if this had been allowed to mature, it could have been much better than the Nintendo 64 Castlevania games. This one was planned to be more of an action-oriented point A to point B style of a game, not a 3D roaming adventure like those were. It makes me wonder what the world would have thought of this had it been fully developed. I don't know, what do you think? Next is Die Hard 64 from Bit Studios for, you guessed it, the Sega Genesis. Just kidding, it's for the Nintendo 64. This is a first-person shooter where you play as Bruce Willis's character, Die Hard. In this state, the game is pretty basic. Die Hard just wanders around getting into fights with his enemies, and everybody wants to kill Die Hard. But as you can imagine, it's pretty hard for him to die. Okay, I'll stop. There's no mission structure in place or anything like that here. You can use the start button to choose from a few different options, some of which don't work yet, like saving. You can even turn certain things about the game on or off. If you choose to start a new game, you can choose a level to load. Interestingly, this prototype comes on 3 different ROMs, each with their own set of levels. The levels all look very similar and quite drab, and there is only a single musical tune that plays for all of the levels, and it too is quite drab. At one point in the game, you return to Nakatomi Plaza to harness its secrets in order to acquire enough power to save the future from the evil Kingpin. I liked this part here though, where someone spelled out Marky Mark with refrigerator magnets, which is right next to the stovetop with 8 burners. Such attention to detail in this one. Oh, and you're gonna need the expansion pack if you want to run this prototype. The reason for this one's cancellation is basically Bit Studios was in some trouble and the Nintendo 64's viable life was just about over. They didn't feel that enough people would want to buy a Nintendo 64 game at the time. Bit Studios would go on to make Die Hard Vendetta for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox in 2002 and 2003, and it was a completely different game. Here's World Reborn on the Game Boy Advance from Neopong Software. This almost entirely complete game is a horizontal shooter. You have a life bar, which is good because it's fairly easy to take damage. Along the way, you can collect power-ups which will definitely help out. There are also life refills to get some of that much needed life back. Your main weapon has rapid fire. Button A fires a much more powerful shot which recharges on its own. It has a gauge on the bottom left of the screen so you can tell where it's at. You gain experience and can even level up, which gives you more life and more firepower. Before too long, you'll be able to select from multiple different ships on any given mission, and you can choose your mission on a world map. Each pilot and each ship levels up independently, and you can combine different pilots with different ships. The scrolling is fairly good, but there's something rather drab about all of the graphics. The story scenes especially have an amateur feel to the visuals. It's very typical of Westerners who try to draw in a manga or anime style but just can't quite get it. The same can be said of the writing. The music isn't bad, but it doesn't do anything to get me excited as I play. The original publisher for the game underwent some restructuring, and as a result the developer's contact no longer worked with them. The new people offered them a 70-30 split, with 30% of the sales going to the developers, whereas they had a 50-50 split before. So they declined, and as a result the game never got published. This next game is part of a franchise that gets remembered fondly these days, perhaps more fondly than it did back in its own time, sadly. However, if this one had come out here, maybe it would have gotten a little bit more respect in its own time, because honestly, it's a damn good game. So why don't I just tell you what it is instead of just being vague about it? Why, to build anticipation, of course. Can you do it? Can you wait the 3 seconds that it'll take me to show the title? Hey! This is Mystical Ninja Goemon 0 for the PlayStation 2 from Konami and Working Designs. Now I know what some of you are saying, and that's probably about how this did get a release at the end of December in the year 2000. How dare you include it in this episode, you charlatan! It's true, I am a charlatan, but it didn't get released in North America. This title holds a special place in gaming as it was the last game Working Designs was localizing before they went belly up. A lot of work has been done on it, and this leaked prototype is dated August 26, 2005. That's right, nearly 5 years after the initial release. You may remember the Goemon game, sometimes known as Mystical Ninja in the West for his adventures on both the Super NES and also the Nintendo 64. They were good games, but personally I always preferred the 16-bit entry. There were quite a few other Goemon games that stayed in Japan. Konami wasn't interested in bringing this over themselves, but Working Design certainly was, since this was kind of an origin of sorts for Goemon. Konami was certainly not in the habit of licensing their IPs to someone else in a different region. Working Designs was somehow eventually able to reach an agreement with Konami. Anyway, you play as Goemon and only Goemon in this action-adventure. You start your journey in a rather large city. Use this time to get used to the controls. They feel fairly natural, but they do take some getting used to when it comes to attacking. After some exploration around town and a couple of minor errands, you're off to an even more crowded town. Then you're out in the wilderness doing battle and saving the entire world and other normal things that young people in games tend to do. At first, the enemies are absolutely overwhelming. They take several hits to defeat and they're everywhere. Seriously, it's hard to get away from them. Fortunately, there's a tea shop close by to restore your life. You want to use this time to run around and grind. I recommend at least level 7 or 8. You'll not only earn a ton of money, but also items that you can equip to restore your life with the tap of a button. Each time you gain a level, you can increase your stats how you choose. I like that. There are other tasks that you'll need to do, like save a small village from annoying critters that are roaming around. This will grant you a special sword, which in turn grants you access past the wind area. There's also a bit of puzzle solving that you'll need to do here and there. This game was developed by the same team at Konami who brought us the Castlevania games on the Nintendo 64, so yeah, there's a bit of awkward 3D platforming sometimes. You do get used to the attacking, but I do wish you had more reach. Most enemies have more reach than you do. It's not a huge issue, though once you level up a bit, the amount of enemies no longer seems overwhelming. Most of the English text is in the game, but the voices are in Japanese, and they would have remained this way had the game seen a release. Bye-bye! Osaki! The text will sometimes draw itself outside of the text box. Victor Ireland of Working Designs tells me that the text needed at least 2 more passes and the bad kerning and any typos would have been worked out. I'm sure more NPC humor would have been added as well because, come on, it's Working Designs. He says that this build is about 20% polished and still has a long way to go. The graphics are fairly decent for the console, but the frame rate is not locked. In fact, it can go way down at some points. The game generally runs in 240p, which I find odd for the system. However, it flips over to 480i for some reason when you go inside buildings. The Japanese version did this too, and I'm not sure if it would have been addressed or not. The music is generally pretty good as well, and never unpleasant. Working Designs did add rumble support, improve the inventory, as well as the camera system. In fact, you can now use the right analog stick to look and reposition the camera around as you move, which is a very welcome feature over the Japanese original. They also made it so that your money is no longer capped at $9,999. Alas, Sony never approved the game. Vic told me that their account manager at Sony, Amanda Brooke, blocked the game for basically no reason at all, and it was something that she was known to do. Maybe she thought that it wouldn't have enough appeal to Western audiences? Just looking at a lot of the direct that did get approved by Sony for the console makes me think that that can't be it. Some people on the internet think that Sony may have rejected the title on account of the graphics and/or the bad frame rate. Again, there's plenty of worse stuff, much worse stuff in fact, that's available for the console. Someone like Atlas, for example, would have no issue getting this exact build approved. One thing to take into account here is that Working Designs was a fairly small US-only company and didn't have a big parent company in Japan to help push things through when an issue arose. Being denied at this point in the localization was the game's death blow. By the time Amanda left Sony to go fail in the mobile industry, it was already too late. Work on this game stopped immediately after it was denied. This, along with the last couple of games that Working Designs lost money on, like Growlancer Generations, spelled doom for the company. On Growlancer Generations, Sony made them do twice the work by including 2 games for the price of 1. I can't imagine Working Designs' finances were doing tremendously well at the time. Overall, this game is quite fun, and I think it would have found an audience here, especially coming from Working Designs and Konami. It's actually a bit addictive to play, and I had a hard time putting it down. Could this really cool Goemon plush have been part of a pre-order campaign had the game been approved? Yes, very, very likely. Another thing that I wonder about is if this game were released, would it have been enough to save Working Designs? And if it did, what else could they have brought out in the future? Would they still be a publisher today? If they were, would they have brought out different and more titles than we saw from Vic's follow-up company Gaijin Works? Would Goemon gain enough of a Western audience to warrant future games being made and localized? Sadly, we'll never know unless one of you has a time machine and a willingness to screw things up in the past. I mean, if you have a time machine, you might as well abuse it, right? Anyway, check out this build if you can. Like I said, the localization isn't entirely complete, but at least you can enjoy the game for the most part. Speaking of games that were in the process of being localized but didn't make it, here's Far East of Eden, Zariah on the Xbox 360 from Gaijin Works. I think that's how you say it, Zariah. Well, that's how I say it. Known as Tengai Makyo Zariah in Japan, this RPG currently sells for quite a bit of coin. This is a complete remake of the game that originally appeared on the PC Engine CD back in 1989. Hudson Soft made the original, and they made this version as well, which was released only in Japan in 2006. Looks like this one would have been an interesting one with some cool battles and some fun mini-games. Gaijin Works, the follow-up company to Working Designs, was in the process of localization, and it was going to be the debut title for the company. They got about 10% of the way into the translation, and as you can see, it's certainly not finished. They made this trailer in hopes of attracting a publishing partner, as they didn't have enough money to get this one onto store shelves on their own. At the time, Microsoft had hard minimums for production runs. Gaijin Works just couldn't swing the amount of capital to fund localization and meeting the minimum initial run required. Victor Ireland tells me that nobody was interested in partnering up to make it happen. He also said that they could have probably done it after their success with Summon Night 5, but by then that window had closed. Hudson Soft was already not doing very well when this game was released in Japan, and by this time they had ceased to exist, which of course made it impossible to work with them. To my knowledge, this build has not been leaked, and even if it were, it's still mostly in Japanese. It's too bad that this didn't happen, as the PC Engine version seemed like a good game, based on what I could play of it. This is Mario Kart XXL and it's for the Game Boy Advance from Dinaris Entertainment Software. This one was made a couple of years after Mario Kart Super Circuit was released on the portable system. Basically, Dinaris put this demo together in hopes of wooing Nintendo into letting them handle a new Mario Kart game, and this was an example of what they had in mind. Basically, you drive Mario around a small track. The main thing here is the 2 layers of scrolling, which is very similar to the F-Zero games on the system, just a lot slower. You can speed up, slow down, and zoom the camera way out, or even way in. There's really not much else to do here unless you want to fall off the edge. All while this is happening, a completely inappropriate country tune plays in the background, which is actually from one of Dinaris Entertainment's games on the PlayStation. So Nintendo ended up taking a look at this, and their response was basically, "Yeah right, as if, LOL. That's right, they actually said LOL instead of laughing. This is Nintendo we're talking about, they have no sense of humor. And so Mario Kart XXL sailed into obscurity where it belongs until recently. I'm still kind of bummed that we didn't get Mystical Ninja on the PlayStation 2. Victor Ireland didn't leak that copy himself, by the way. He said that he gave a few copies to friends in the press back in the day, hoping they'd write articles or blurbs about why the game should come out, hoping to persuade Sony before he submitted it for approval for the final time. Anyway, I've got a few more games for you, so let's just finish this episode up. Here's the Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas on the Sega Dreamcast from Swing Entertainment. You remember the 1994 Flintstones movie with John Goodman and Rick Moranis? Well, how about the prequel movie in 2000 with a completely different cast consisting of people you've mostly never heard of? Yeah, that's what this kart racing game is based on. As bad as that movie is, this unreleased game might be even worse. The controls are extremely twitchy, meaning you're constantly compensating for some serious oversteer, which makes you bob left and right the entire time that you play. Apologies if anyone is getting motion sick while watching this, I'll try to be as quick as I can with this one. You hit bowling pins to trigger the item, because Fred Flintstone likes bowling. The track design is rather awful, as it's often difficult to tell where you need to go. The game will often tell you that you're going the wrong way when it doesn't seem like you are. The graphics are drawn in a mostly cel-shaded style and look basic even for their time. The frame rate doesn't really do the game any favors. The music is also basic, but it's still probably the best part of the game, though that's not saying much. A Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas kart racing game did get released on the PlayStation 2, but it's a completely different game. I haven't seen any official reason why this one was cancelled, but the fact that it was based on a lame movie with low ratings, was on a console that wasn't doing well, and also that this game sucks a bowling ball through a straw certainly didn't help. How about Prize Fighter for the Sega Saturn? That's right, they wanted to release the black and white full motion video boxing game from the Sega CD on the poor Saturn. This was found on an old hard drive when scrounging up the source code of the game. The source code for the Sega CD version was being used to reference the HD remake that they're doing, the timings and whatnot of the game. And the code for the Saturn version just happened to be in there. They were able to cobble together a complete, fully playable Saturn version that was being made. Well, I use the term playable very loosely as come on, it's prize fighter. Being playable isn't really the strength of most FMV games, and it's no different here. The video quality looks much better than the Sega CD version though, and it's a lot bigger. Instead of having a HUD built around the video window, this version just puts status icons in the upper corners. I've only heard guesses as to why this one was cancelled, but the prevailing theory is that Digital Pictures went out of business before it could be released. Sadly, or fortunately depending on your view of the game, this version is not available for public consumption as the rights holders don't want that. Not now, maybe never. And thanks to Todd McHenry for supplying this footage. This is The Sacred Pools, made by Segasoft for the Sega Saturn. This is a full-motion video adventure written, directed, and executive produced by James Riley, one of the guys behind Night Trap. That's right, another FMV game, but this one is an adventure with overtones similar to Myst, with you wandering around by way of pressing the D-pad to move. You're trying to get a bunch of different crystals, I think? I'm not really sure what's going on here, as the game itself makes absolutely zero sense, and it's not generous with the clues that it hands out. Sometimes someone will jump out in front of you, do a little dance, and this will knock off some of your life. Thanks, fella. Other times you follow women around. Yeah, I think they want me to follow them, and I'm more than happy to oblige. Sometimes they'll do a little dance that causes no harm, or one that does cause harm. Geez, this lady's abs are ripped! The game is supposed to be an erotic thriller, but there's no nudity or anything like that in here, nor is it erotic or thrilling. What's weird is that this game was not only intended for the Sega Saturn, but the PC and yes, the PlayStation as well. That's right, a Sega game intended for the PlayStation. This had a budget of between $2 and $3 million, not that you can tell by the cheesy sets and acting. It made an appearance at E3 in May of 1996, and the press did not like it at all. The game was eventually pulled from the schedule and never released. It turns out that the world was sick of FMV games by 1996, and really, who can blame them? Should have happened sooner. All 3 discs for each platform were recently released by the website Gaming Alexandria. The quality of the FM video itself is generally pretty good for the Saturn. It's quite macro blocky on the color red though, which is often the case on the console. The PlayStation version features full-screen video that's less grainy, but the video still looks kind of waxy with plenty of its own style of macro blocking. Between the 2 console versions, the Saturn one seems more complete, as the PlayStation version will often exhibit glitches in the video or even outright crash. When it comes down to it, it's more interesting that this game exists and that it was cancelled than it is to play. This is Ring, the Legend of Nibbe Lugan from Cryo for the Sega Dreamcast. It does not have a proper title screen. This prototype is dated September 9, 1999. That's right, the very same day the Dreamcast launched in North America. This is a port from the PC game, and it's a point-and-click adventure. You're the bad guy, or at least you want to be. Your brother is busy toiling away at a pot of molten steel or whatnot, and you take all of the items that you need from his area. You can even beat him up when he refuses to give you a certain item. That's right, your character is truly evil. From there, you can finally start your little rail scooter or whatever it is and glide along these cables. You'll make your way into a different room. You can call up your inventory easily and use any object that you have. If you can use it, it'll appear solid instead of transparent. This port ends rather quickly, like in less than 5 or 10 minutes, and then resets to the title screen, or rather what is in place of the title screen. Maybe I missed something along the way. In fact, this was going to be a 3-disc game, and only disc 2 has been leaked so far, so this takes place somewhere midway into the game. Unfortunately, it doesn't take advantage of the Dreamcast mouse, but I wonder if it would have had it been completed and released. This is one of the very few titles based on Windows CE for the console. I think this would have been pretty fun had it been finished and released. No word on why it was canned. Lastly, we have Off the Wall from Tengen for the mighty TurboGrafx-16 or PC Engine if you prefer. This is a port of the Atari arcade game. The concept is similar to Breakout, where there's a ball bouncing around and you have to keep it in play with your paddle, which moves up and down the side of the screen. The goal is to bounce the ball into the exit tile while scoring as much as possible. The arcade game allows up to 3 players simultaneously, though this one seems to be single player only. There's no reason it couldn't support 3 players though. And who knows, maybe it does. I was too lazy to hook up 3 controllers because it's a pain in the ass to do so on this console. This version isn't quite complete, and it froze once when I lost all of my lives. The debug mode is also enabled by default, which means you can skip to the next level at any time by tapping the select button, which might be my 3rd or 4th favorite button on the PC Engine controller. What's yours? Nothing about this game plays to the console's strengths. There currently seems to be no public information about why this was cancelled, but I'm guessing Tengen felt it probably wouldn't sell very well, especially on the TurboGrafx. Still, gotta say, it's better than Clax. Not to be outdone, the Game Gear also has its very own unreleased version of Off the Wall. This one feels more complete, as multi-ball, power-ups, and other facets of the game are implemented here. However, the play area is much smaller and would only be made worse by the Game Gear's small screen. What's moderately interesting though is that 2 players are supported with a gear-to-gear link cable. Even though it's more complete, this one feels more tedious and less smooth than the TurboGrafx-16 edition. Which one of these 2 do you prefer? And there you go, a bunch more unreleased games. Castlevania Resurrection reminds me that there's still a 32X Castlevania game out there that wasn't finished, and I wonder if it's even playable. If it is, I really hope it gets leaked sometime soon. Anyway, what are some other unfinished games that either need to get leaked or finished up and sold somewhere? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Over the decades, Sega Saturn games have become increasingly brittle. Check this out. Of course, Sega CD games fall victim to the same circumstances. So do PlayStation game long boxes and even the jewel cases. Same with TurboGrafx-16 games. And even the mighty Sega Dreamcast. Not Sega Genesis games though, they actually get better. Check this out. Nice. Oh, can't lose. Let's see how much better Streets of Rage 2 gets.